Have you ever achieved something you dreamed about for years, only to watch your family celebrate someone else's success in the same moment? That was my graduation day, the culmination of 8 years of pre-veterinary studies and veterinary school, reduced to background noise while my family gave my brother a standing ovation. I'm Blair Pemberton, and I've spent the last 7 years building a practice that saves the lives of some of Alabama's most valuable competition horses. But on May 12, 2018, as I sat in that sea of burgundy caps and gowns at Auburn University's veterinary graduation ceremony, I was just the overlooked daughter whose achievement happened to coincide with her brother's moment of glory. The Jordan-Hare Stadium buzzed with families clutching programs and scanning the field for their graduates. My parents, Richard and Claudia Pemberton, sat in the third row with our extended family, aunts, uncles, and grandparents who had driven in from Montgomery and Mobile. My father's Rolex caught the afternoon sun as he adjusted his reading glasses to study the program, while my mother smoothed her cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They looked every inch the successful Mountain Brook couple. He, the commercial real estate developer who'd shaped half of Birmingham's skyline, she the interior designer whose work graced the pages of Southern Living. Camden, my older brother, sat with them in his perfectly pressed navy suit, fresh from his third year at University of Alabama Law School. At 26, he already carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world or in our family's hierarchy of priorities. The university had selected him to deliver the keynote address at the undergraduate ceremony happening simultaneously across campus. Our golden boy, as my grandmother had been calling him since he could walk, was about to address 20,000 people about leadership and legacy. The veterinary ceremony began with the usual pomp and procession. Dean Morrison took the podium, his voice carrying across the stadium as he spoke about the rigor of veterinary education, the dedication required to heal animals, and the sacred trust placed in our profession. I felt the weight of my stethoscope around my neck, the same one I'd bought with tip money from my job at the campus veterinary clinic, polished to a shine for this moment. My phone buzzed against my leg. A text from my mother. Camden's speech starts in 10 minutes, so proud. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. My diploma ceremony was scheduled to run until 3:30. The undergraduate ceremony, where Camden would speak, began at 3U. In the mathematics of family attention, the overlap meant I would graduate in silence. I watched other families in the stands. They held signs with their graduates' names, took endless photos, and wiped away tears. Mrs. Henderson, my physiology professor, had told us that veterinary graduation was particularly emotional because of the unique challenges we'd faced, the academic intensity, the emotional toll of learning to heal and sometimes to let go, the financial burden that averaged $80,000 in debt by graduation day. Your families will understand the magnitude of this achievement, she'd said during our final class. What I understood, sitting there in my cap and gown, was that my family had already chosen which achievement mattered most. The ceremony continued with departmental recognitions. When they announced the magna cum laude graduates, the top 10% of our class, I heard my name echo through the stadium speakers. Blair Pemberton, magna cum laude, specialization in equine medicine. I stood and waved toward my family's section, my heart hammering with pride and anticipation. Through the sea of faces, I could see my grandmother pointing in my direction, but my parents' seats were empty. They had left for Camden's speech. The dean continued with individual diploma presentations. calling each graduate forward to receive their degree and take the oath that would officially make us doctors of veterinary medicine. "This is the moment," I whispered to my classmate Sarah, who sat beside me. 4 years of 18-hour days, $30,000 in student loans, and more coffee than should be humanly possible, all leading to hearing my name called. But when Dr. Morrison announced, "Blair Elizabeth Pemberton, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine," I walked across that stage to scattered applause from strangers and classmates. My family's section remained empty, save for my grandmother, who stood and clapped with tears streaming down her face. Through the blur of my own tears, I could see her holding up her phone, recording the moment my parents had chosen to miss. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was graduating with a degree that would allow me to heal broken bones, while my own family was actively breaking my heart. As I accepted my diploma and shook the dean's hand, I realized that this moment of achievement had also become a moment of devastating clarity. I had always been supporting character in their story, never the protagonist of my own. The aftermath of graduation hit me like a sedative wearing off after surgery, slow then all at once. My family returned to the veterinary ceremony just as the final graduates were crossing the stage, my parents breathless and glowing with pride that had nothing to do with me. My mother's lipstick was slightly smudged from kissing Camden's cheek, and my father's chest puffed with the satisfaction of a man whose son had just delivered a speech that would be quoted in the university alumni magazine. "Blair, there you are," my mother said, her voice bright with the artificial enthusiasm she used when she realized she'd missed something important but wanted to pretend otherwise. "How was the ceremony? We heard it was lovely." The word "heard" hung in the air like smoke. They hadn't seen it. They'd heard about it secondhand, probably from my grandmother, who was now conspicuously quiet beside them. "It was fine," I managed, my diploma clutched in my hands like evidence of a crime only I could see. The burgundy folder felt heavy, weighted with 4 years of sacrifice they'd never fully witnessed. Around us, other families posed for photos, graduates beaming beside parents who looked ready to burst with pride. I watched Camden accept congratulations from our extended family, his speech apparently having brought several people to tears with its eloquent thoughts on generational responsibility and carrying forward family legacies. Maybe you felt this before. The moment when you realize your achievements are footnotes in someone else's story. Standing there in my cap and gown, holding a degree that represented early morning clinics, late-night study sessions, and the kind of academic rigor that left some of my classmates broken, I felt invisible in my own life. My Uncle Robert clapped Camden on the shoulder. "That speech was remarkable, son. You really captured what it means to honor your family's investments in your future." The word investments echoed strangely. I thought about the $18,000 I'd borrowed for my final semester, the work-study job that had me cleaning kennels at 5 in the morning, the ramen noodles that had been my primary food group for 2 years. "We should celebrate," my mother announced. "I made reservations at the club for dinner. Camden, you can tell everyone about the speech." The club, Mountain Brook Country Club, where my parents had been members since before I was born, where Camden had learned to play tennis and golf, where I'd spent countless Sunday dinners being reminded of proper posture and appropriate conversation topics. As we walked toward the parking lot, my grandmother fell into step beside me. At 78, Grandmother Pemberton had survived the kind of Southern social expectations that could crush weaker women, but she'd also developed the sharp eye of someone who noticed when the family dynamics went sideways. "Your diploma," she said quietly, taking my arm. Let me see it." I handed her the folder and she opened it carefully, running her fingers over the embossed seal and Latin text. "Dr. Blair Elizabeth Pemberton," she read aloud. "Do you know what this means, sweetheart?" I shrugged, the weight of disappointment making everything feel heavier. "That I can legally treat animals now? It means you're the first veterinarian in 4 generations of Pembertons," she said, her voice firm. "Your great-grandfather would have been fascinated. He bred horses, you know. Always said the veterinarian was the most important person on any farm." She paused, looking back toward my parents, who were still basking in Camden's reflected glory. Some people don't understand the difference between impressive and important. At dinner, the conversation revolved around Camden's speech like a planet orbiting the sun. Extended family members who had attended the undergraduate ceremony recounted their favorite lines, discussing how poised he'd looked at the podium, how his voice had carried across the stadium without trembling. My cousin Jessica, herself a recent graduate from Birmingham Southern, peppered him with questions about law school applications and summer internship opportunities. I sat at the end of the table, still wearing my cap, the only visible evidence that I had also graduated that day. When the server asked about special occasions, my father proudly announced, "My son gave the keynote address at Auburn today." No mention of his daughter receiving her doctorate. No acknowledgement of the 8 years I'd spent working toward this moment, but I had started documenting things, even then. Not consciously at first, just photos on my phone, screenshots of text messages, printed emails. Something in me knew that this pattern of overlooked achievements wasn't accidental. When your family consistently celebrates everyone except you, you start keeping evidence, if only to prove to yourself that your accomplishments actually happened. That night, in my apartment near campus, I opened my laptop and created a folder called Graduation Day. I uploaded photos from the ceremony, the ones my grandmother had taken, the official university photographer's shots, even a screenshot of the live stream where you could see me walking across the stage to collect my diploma. I saved the program listing my magna cum laude distinction. I printed the email from Dean Morrison congratulating our class on achieving the 3rd highest board examination scores in the college's history. If no one else was going to remember that Dr. Blair Pemberton had graduated that day, at least I would have proof that it happened. The truth about family patterns is that once you start seeing them, you can't unsee them. Graduation day hadn't been an anomaly. It had been the culmination of 29 years of systemic overlooking that I'd somehow convinced myself was normal. In the weeks following the ceremony, as I started my residency at the Birmingham Equine Hospital, I began mentally cataloging moments I'd previously dismissed as coincidence. My acceptance to Auburn's veterinary program, announced at Sunday dinner in 2014, met with polite congratulations before the conversation immediately shifted to Camden's summer internship at a prestigious Montgomery law firm. My Dean's List recognition every semester, mentioned briefly in phone calls before my mother would launch into updates about Camden's law review membership or moot court victories. My undergraduate graduation, summa cum laude, overshadowed by Camden's acceptance to law school the same week. Dr. Catherine Mills, my residency supervisor, noticed my habit of working through lunch breaks and staying late to review cases. "You're brilliant with these horses," she told me one sweltering July afternoon, as I finished suturing a thoroughbred's leg wound that would have stumped some licensed veterinarians. "But you work like you're trying to prove something to someone who isn't paying attention." She was right. I was building a resume that should have made any family proud. Emergency surgeries on horses worth more than most people's houses, research publications in equine medicine journals, recognition from the Alabama Veterinary Medical Association for innovative treatment protocols. But my parents' conversations still centered around Camden's law firm recruitment, his girlfriend's social connections, his potential for making partner by 35. The moment of crystal clear recognition came in October 2018, 5 months after graduation. I had just successfully performed emergency colic surgery on Midnight's Promise, a champion Arabian stallion whose bloodline was worth approximately $2 million. The surgery had taken 6 hours, requiring techniques I'd only read about in journals. When the horse stood and took his first healthy steps post-surgery, the owner, Mrs. Caroline Whitfield, one of Alabama's most prominent horse breeders, literally cried with relief. "You saved my horse's life," she said, gripping my hands. "This stallion represents 4 generations of careful breeding. You've preserved his legacy." I called my parents that evening, exhausted but exhilarated, wanting to share this triumph. My mother answered on the 3rd ring, her voice distracted. "Blair, honey, can I call you back? Camden just got home with news about his summer associate position at Bradley Arand. They're practically guaranteeing him a job offer." That was it. No curiosity about my emergency surgery, no acknowledgement that their daughter had just performed a procedure that saved a multi-million-dollar animal's life. Camden's summer job prospects, something that wouldn't even begin for 8 months, took precedence over my actual immediate professional triumph. I hung up and sat in my car outside the hospital, still wearing scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and horse sweat, and made a decision that would reshape everything. I was going to document this pattern thoroughly, not as evidence for some future confrontation, but as validation for myself that my achievements were real and significant, even if my family couldn't see them. Over the next several months, I created what I started thinking of as my recognition archive. I saved every newspaper article mentioning my work, the Birmingham Business Journal piece about young veterinarians making their mark, the Alabama Horse Council newsletter featuring my research on preventive lameness treatment. I kept thank you cards from horse owners, commendations from the hospital administration, and photos of myself with patients I'd saved. My colleague, Dr. Michael Stevens, who had become a close friend during residency, noticed my new documentation habits. "You're building quite a portfolio," he said one day, finding me photographing a certificate of appreciation from the Quarter Horse Association. "Planning to apply for something?" "Just keeping track," I said, but the truth was more complicated. I was creating proof that Dr. Blair Pemberton existed as more than a supporting character in the Camden-Pemberton success story. Meanwhile, family dinners continued their predictable script. Camden's law school achievements dominated conversations. His election to law review, his selection for a federal clerkship application, his engagement to Jessica Thornton, whose family owned half of Mobile's historic district. When I mentioned my promotion to senior resident or my invitation to present research at the American Association of Equine Practitioners Conference, the responses were perfunctory at best. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say before turning to Camden. "Tell us more about Jessica's family. Her father's shipping business sounds fascinating." The pattern became so pronounced that even my grandmother started commenting. "They're proud of you," she assured me one Sunday after dinner. "They just express it differently." But pride expressed as indifference felt remarkably similar to pride not existing at all. By Christmas 2018, I had collected enough evidence to write a dissertation on family favoritism. But more importantly, I had begun building relationships with people who actually valued my accomplishments. Mrs. Whitfield had recommended me to other prominent horse owners. Dr. Mills was encouraging me to apply for advanced surgical fellowships. My professional reputation was growing among people who understood the significance of what I did. Maybe you've been there, the moment when you realize that the validation you've been seeking from specific people isn't coming, and you have to decide whether to keep performing for an audience that isn't watching or start building your life for people who are actually paying attention. I chose the latter. The confrontation I'd been unconsciously preparing for arrived in March 2019, exactly 10 months after my graduation, packaged in the form of my parents' annual Easter dinner. They had invited the extended family to celebrate Camden's engagement to Jessica, his successful completion of his 2L year, and his acceptance of a summer associate position at Birmingham's most prestigious law firm. The evening was designed to be a showcase of Pemberton family success, which, as usual, meant Camden's success. I arrived at my parents' Mountain Brook home carrying a folder that had grown thick with documentation over the past months. Inside were articles, awards, photographs, and letters of recommendation that painted the picture of a veterinary career already exceeding most people's lifetime achievements. I wasn't planning to dump everything on the dinner table like evidence in a trial, but I wanted it close, like armor I might need. The house buzzed with familiar energy, my mother's anxiety-driven perfectionism, manifesting in precisely arranged flower arrangements and place settings that belonged in Southern Living magazine. She had hired caterers for the occasion, transforming our dining room into something that looked more like a society event than a family dinner. Camden and Jessica held court in the living room, surrounded by relatives who hung on their every word about law school, the wedding planning, and their 5-year plan that included partnership tracks and country club memberships. Blair, my cousin Amanda approached with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people you see once a year. I heard you're working with horses now. That must be fun, like playing with pets all day. Before I could correct the fundamental misunderstanding of what equine surgery entails, my mother called everyone to dinner. The seating arrangement told its own story. Camden and Jessica at my father's right hand, the seats of honor, while I found myself between Great-Uncle Harold, who was nearly deaf, and my 10-year-old nephew, who spent the entire meal playing games on his phone. My father stood to make a toast, crystal wine glass catching the chandelier light. "To Camden and Jessica," he began, his voice carrying the weight of paternal pride, "for showing us what it means to build a legacy. Camden's achievements at Alabama have exceeded our highest expectations, and his future with Thornton and Associates promises to uphold the Pemberton tradition of excellence." The family raised their glasses in unison, murmuring approval and congratulations. I sipped my wine and waited for the addendum, some acknowledgement that his daughter had also been building something significant. It never came. Dinner conversation flowed around Camden's summer associate salary, 6 figures, Jessica's wedding dress shopping, Kleinfeld in New York, and their apartment hunting, Highland Park naturally. When my grandmother asked about my work, I mentioned that I'd been selected to present my research on equine lameness prevention at the National AAEP conference, a recognition that typically took veterinarians years to achieve. "Research?" my father said, his tone suggesting I'd mentioned something vaguely distasteful. "Are you planning to stay in academics? When will you start making real money?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Making real money in veterinary medicine meant owning a practice, which I was already working toward, or specializing in high-value procedures, which I was already doing. But the implication was clear. My profession, regardless of expertise level, would never measure up to Camden's legal career in my father's estimation. That's when I reached for my folder. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I thought you might be interested in seeing what I've been accomplishing." I pulled out the Birmingham Business Journal article featuring young professionals making their mark in Alabama. My photo appeared prominently, alongside a description of surgical techniques I'd pioneered and horses I'd saved. My mother glanced at the article politely. "That's nice, sweetheart." She set it aside without reading beyond the headline. I tried again, pulling out letters from horse owners whose animals I'd saved, including one from Mrs. Whitfield describing how my surgical intervention had preserved a bloodline worth millions. I showed them photographs from the State Veterinary Conference, where I'd received recognition for innovative treatment protocols. But each piece of evidence I presented seemed to disappear into a void of polite disinterest. Camden's engagement ring drew more examination and excitement than my professional achievements combined. The breaking point came when Jessica started talking about her bridal shower guest list. "We're inviting some of Birmingham's most prominent families," she said. "The Thorntons, the Carters, the Montgomerys. It's going to be quite the social event." "Blair should bring someone too," my mother said suddenly, as if remembering I existed. "Are you dating anyone? It would be nice if you could find someone stable. Maybe another doctor?" The casual dismissal embedded in that suggestion, the implication that my professional life was somehow incomplete without a male counterpart to legitimize it, hit me like a slap. Here I was, documenting a career that was already surpassing most people's entire professional achievements, and my family's primary concern was whether I had found a man to validate my existence. I stood up, gathering my folder of evidence that had failed to make any impression. "I need some air," I said, and walked onto the back terrace where my grandmother was sitting alone, watching the sunset paint the Birmingham skyline gold. "They don't see you," she said simply, not turning around. "They're not going to see you. The question is, when are you going to stop needing them to?" That night, driving home to my apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done performing for an audience that had no intention of applauding. I was going to build a life so fulfilling, so successful, so surrounded by people who actually valued my contributions, that my family's inability to recognize my worth would become irrelevant. It was time to stop seeking validation from people who were determined not to give it. 5 years later, I'm writing this from my office at Pemberton Equine Medical Center. Yes, I kept the family name, not out of sentiment, but because it looks impressive on veterinary hospital signage. The irony isn't lost on me that the Pemberton name has become synonymous with excellence in Alabama equine medicine, largely due to the family member they never bothered to celebrate. My practice now employs 12 veterinarians across 3 locations, handles emergency surgeries for horses worth more than most people's houses, and has become the premier destination for equine medical care in the Southeast. Last month, I was featured on the cover of Veterinary Economics magazine as one of the 40 under 40 practice owners reshaping animal medicine. The article is framed on my wall, right next to my diploma, the one my parents missed seeing me receive. The transformation didn't happen overnight. After that Easter dinner confrontation in 2019, I spent the next year systematically building relationships with people who actually saw value in what I accomplished. Mrs. Whitfield introduced me to other prominent horse owners. Dr. Mills became a mentor who pushed me toward practice ownership. I joined professional organizations, attended every conference, and said yes to opportunities that scared me. When the chance came to purchase my supervising veterinarian's practice in 2020, I didn't call my parents for advice. Instead, I worked with a financial advisor who specialized in veterinary practice transitions, secured loans based on my own track record, and built a business plan that projected growth I wasn't entirely sure I could achieve. But I did achieve it, and then exceeded it. The most satisfying moment came 2 years ago when my father, networking at the country club, discovered that several of his business associates were clients of mine. "Your daughter saved my stallion's life," one told him. "Best equine veterinarian in the state. We're lucky to have her." My father, according to my grandmother who heard the story secondhand, looked genuinely surprised that anyone outside the family had even heard of me. Camden finished law school, passed the bar, and joined the prestigious firm exactly as planned. He's successful, respected, and well on his way to making partner. Our family still celebrates his achievements, his first big case win, his promotion to senior associate, his and Jessica's purchase of a house in Mountain Brook that's featured in this month's Birmingham magazine. The difference is that I no longer wait for equivalent recognition of my accomplishments, because I've created a professional and personal life where recognition flows naturally from people who understand what I've built. My staff threw me a surprise party last week to celebrate our practice being named Alabama Veterinary Hospital of the Year by the State Veterinary Association. Dr. Sarah Chen, whom I hired fresh out of vet school and who now handles our small animal emergency cases, gave a speech about how working here had exceeded every professional dream she'd had. The room was filled with colleagues, clients, and friends who had watched me build something meaningful, a chosen family that celebrates achievements because they understand the work behind them. Mrs. Whitfield, now 82 and still one of my most valued clients, pulled me aside during the party. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, you seemed like you were trying to prove something to people who weren't paying attention. Now you just seem like someone who knows exactly what she's worth." She was right. The desperate need for my parents' validation had been replaced by something more sustainable. A deep satisfaction in work that matters, relationships built on mutual respect, and the knowledge that I've created something significant regardless of who acknowledges it. I still attend family gatherings, but they feel different now. Camden's successes no longer diminish my sense of self-worth because I've stopped using his achievements as the measuring stick for my own. When conversation gravitates toward his latest promotion or Jessica's social commitments, I listen with genuine interest rather than resentment. I've built a life full enough that my family's blind spots no longer feel like existential threats. Last Christmas, my nephew asked what I did for work. Before my parents could deflect with their usual "Blair works with animals" over simplification, I showed him photos on my phone, me performing surgery on a champion thoroughbred, our hospital's state-of-the-art surgical suite, newspaper clippings from our charity work providing free veterinary care for rescue horses. His eyes widened with genuine awe. "Aunt Blair, you're like a superhero for horses." Maybe you've been where I was, waiting for specific people to finally see your worth, to celebrate your achievements, to acknowledge the work you've put into becoming excellent at something meaningful. What would happen if you stopped performing for people who aren't watching and started building something so fulfilling that their applause becomes unnecessary. Your value isn't determined by your family's ability to recognize it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop waiting for validation from people who've decided not to give it and start living like you already know exactly how much you're worth. Because you do know. You've always known. It's time to start believing it.